really needs no introduction, but for some of you who may not be familiar with him, he's the former chairman of the National Black Police Association. I think that's in your booklet program. But he's much more than that. He's a family man. He's a former veteran. He was a police officer in the District of Columbia. And he even walked the street beats. So he's been involved with law enforcement for a long, long time. And he prides himself as a semi-professional basketball player. Yeah, until his knees started. But he is indeed an inspirational person. I had the pleasure of meeting Ron back in the 80s. And we formed a relationship and a bond along with some other people who are here with the National Black Police Association. And since that time, Ron and I and some of the other members have been working together to transform policing in the community. And we've developed some model paradigms for policing. And as a matter of fact, well, I think somebody said it the other day, we were in Florida, Opelika, Florida. One of the chiefs who bought into our paradigm, we taught the methodology to the community and the different constituents, and they liked it very well. The problem was with Opelika during that time, the police chief who had bought wholeheartedly into our model was fired after we left, right, at the year or two. And they implemented the model and took the claim and the fame for it and had national news. And they even used our title, Extended Community Policing.
Wow.
That changed some of the stats in Opelika. But anyway, Ron and I have gone around the world along with Preston and some of the other people that you see up there, from South Africa to Cardiff, Wales, to London, to, or you name it. And not only for pleasure, but for academic and business purposes. In terms of, we established a relationship with the UK, and they love our policing models and paradigm, and we've gone over there and taught the model. But just to give you something about Ron, I'm only scratching the surface. This brother has been in congressional hearings about half of his life, testifying on behalf of injustice and all kinds of problems with the policing in this country. Probably, to me, the greatest compliment that he could have had to me was recently when Michelle Alexander asked him to write the foreword for her book, The New Jim Crow. So without any further ado, Ron Hampton. We didn't even give him a topic. We said, do what you want to do.
Oh, man. Let me thank you, the university here, Jackson State, my friends and colleagues, and I'm very excited about the opportunity to talk a little bit today about this subject. Let me just put it that way, and you all will recognize it. But before I do that, let me say how much I appreciate Dr. Bell, Dr. Franklin, Dr. Morgan. Also, Preston, Hazel, all of the guys, Damon, Felicia, Eric, Donna, and then my brother James, who lives in Washington with me. All of this says, all of those relationships and the things that we've been involved in mean so very much to me. We've traveled all over the world together. If someone had said this to me when I was in high school, that I would be doing this, I would have just flat out denied it. Because when I was in high school, people didn't even know I could talk till I got in the 8th grade. And I haven't stopped talking. I haven't stopped talking since then. But I just got excited, you know, things started to excite me. Basketball was one of them. Played in the service, played in college. My knees have gone bad now. But, you know, the idea of getting involved in something for life that excites you is something that doesn't happen to everyone. And so I'm blessed in a lot of ways to be able to have done this. Just a little bit about myself. I'm a Washingtonian, born and raised there. Went to school there. And of course, you know, Washington is a plantation. Because I think you ought to be real about your situation. You know, we don't have control over our destiny. You know, everything we do, even our legislation, has to go through Congress. You know, they come up with a bill and then it has to go to Congress, got 90 days to come back. If the Congress don't disagree, then we can do it. But one of the things that I like about Washington, D.C. is that it was a chocolate city. Now, we're straining and busting the gut trying to keep it, or some of the essence of the chocolate city there. But I took pride in that because it was this community that we've been talking about that existed, that helped one another. I came back home from Vietnam, ultimately joined the police department. I didn't want to be a police. That wasn't what I dreamt about every day. Of course I wanted to be a basketball player, professional basketball player, but that didn't work. But my mother said you have to have a fallback. And so I fell back. When I went home, I worked on the Hill, on Capitol Hill. And I had to tell the story because I think it sort of situated my life. I worked on Capitol Hill for this senator from Virginia. He was a Republican, white senator, didn't catch him much from. Plus my office was in the basement of the Capitol, so I didn't get the chance to see him anyway. But my job was the thing that really situated me because my job was to take the mail after the person opened the mail and then read the mail that had to do with cases, precedent-setting cases for folk that were incarcerated. So I would get to go to the law library over in the Capitol, look up the case, write the information down, and then send it back to the incarcerated person. So I really gained an interest in law enforcement. And I just had to leave Capitol Hill, went to work for the National Criminal Justice Reference Service. And in those days, this was back in the early 60s, not the early 60s, early 70s. And my job was to look up the information and then send it out to people to request. You know, they pretty much do that now, but Justice Department operates by some subcontractors, the National Criminal Justice Reference Service. So that created this interest in law enforcement. But when I ultimately joined the police department, I forgot that there was a difference between reading and theory and what we call now evidence-based practices and then the actual work. So when I joined the police department, I was excited about criminal justice stuff and law enforcement. But you had to fall into a certain pattern to be a good police officer. Because we didn't develop the description of what a good police officer was. I don't know anybody who did that. And then they looked like me. Because when I joined the police department in 1970, we had just been 2 years or 1 year out of the desegregation of police cars in Washington, D.C. They desegregated police cars in 1969. In 1961, they had just allowed black police officers to arrest white people. 1961. black police officers were allowed to arrest white people. During that time, black police officers were relegated to working only in the black community. They couldn't work in the white community. And there was a reason for that. Because black folk were inferior. They were only 3/5 of a human being. So you couldn't arrest somebody who was superior to you. And we couldn't work in the white community. So once they allowed us to arrest white people, then they desegregated cars. I remember working in 1969, the chief of police that I had an opportunity to work under, worked in the precinct where they got their assignment, and the white sergeant left him sitting in the police precinct when he went out on patrol. He never came back to get him because he didn't want to work with a black person. And when he was called to work with him, he signed off and went home that night. So, you know, the history of policing, I recognize. And in the city where black folk made up the majority of it, I was aware of that. I was conscious of it too. So when I went there, I wanted to work for my people. I didn't make no bones about it. I wanted to work for my community. And I enjoyed that. Now that wasn't necessarily, at the end of the day, that wasn't necessarily what policing was about from a white perspective. They wanted me to be a law and order person. You know, and they just thought from the very beginning when I got there that they had this jewel that they could, you know, form. Because 6'5", I think I weighed about 200 pounds. I weigh a little bit more now. But they was gonna use my intimidation. But again, I had the benefit of reading those books in the Capitol, reading those books at the National Criminal Justice Reference Service. And I took on slogans and information like Pat Murphy. I don't know if any of you ever heard of Pat Murphy, but Pat Murphy had a saying, and it came straight out of Peel. It came straight from Peel. He said, "The police police with the consent of the people." Mm-hmm. The police police with the consent of the people. And of course, I took that and turned it into something even more basic. That the real power that police have isn't the power of arrest, it's the power to influence the quality of people's life. Mm-hmm. Now that's what a black man said. And so I lived my day, every day at the police department, understanding and realizing the power that I had as a police officer. And you better believe that I did it. There was no question about it. Now, did that endear my supervisors to me? Of course it did. But I didn't go there to be anybody's friend.
That's right.
That wasn't my job. My job was to work for the people who lived in Washington, D.C. in the district that I worked in. I remember the first time I wasn't walking the footbridge, but I was in the car training. I'm at 14th and U. Car turns a corner, somebody driving a Mercedes. Now this is around 1972, 73. The white officer I'm working with, he pulled up behind the guy, pulled him over. And so I said, "Well, what you pull him over for?" He said, "Well, you know, it's a black man driving a Mercedes." So, you know, I didn't say nothing. Then I let him get out, go talk to him, came back. He ran him through, wasn't nothing happening. So I said, "Well, what was wrong?" He said, "Well, black folks don't drive Mercedes, there's something must be wrong." So I said, "Well, I don't think so. I know a whole lot of black people who drive Mercedes, drive Cadillacs too." But this was a mentality that was embedded in it because they had been conditioned that way. And a lot of the young whites that we worked with came from some other place other than Washington, D.C. They didn't have that understanding or perspective about what black folk, how they live, the whole 9 yards. But by virtue of the relationships that we built in the police department, we started our organization around 1973, Black Police Association in Washington. So we were able to do the kind of things that really made a difference, and then reaching out, beginning the national organization. The kind of police officer I was one who understood that power, working in the community. I walked a footbeat in Adams Morgan. If you're familiar with Washington, D.C., Adams Morgan, uptown, one of the most diverse communities in the city. And I walked that footbeat for probably about 8 years. One of the best jobs I had. I refused to sort of want to work in a car. That didn't excite me. I can tell you how many people lived on my beat. I can tell you how many businesses was on my beat. I can tell you how many fire plugs was on my beat, because I lived on my beat. You know, police officers they sort of say things like, you know, I can't live on my beat or live in the city because it's dangerous, and people who I arrest, I don't want to live next door to people who I arrest. That didn't bother me, because see, if you committed a crime, then you warrant the arrest. But I could arrest you with dignity and respect, and it worked. I just enjoyed being a police officer and working in my community. Now, did I make arrests? I made a few, but most of the time I didn't have to make an arrest because I had the power of arrest.
Mm-hmm.
See, there are a lot of crimes that police officers have control over that they don't have to make an arrest. In other words, they can make the decision. And brothers and sisters, I don't have no problem making a decision. Now, my supervisors had problems, but I also read the book. So, you know, you can't be a police officer without reading. So I understood the law. See, there's a thing called, Dr. Bell, the elements of crime. And if the elements of crime don't come together, then there hasn't been a crime.
That's right.
So I don't go for the okie doke. Didn't go for it then. I was at the community policing comes along. And this has been a real interesting 2 days. And Dr. Morgan, I suggested a theme for next year. And I want to talk about that for a minute, if I can. Because this is my second time, but not my second time in Jackson. But in my training, if you're going to talk about certain things, it's fine. But you always ought to leave something for people to think about as well as make a suggestion. And I want to suggest that maybe the next time we have, I know Nancy talked about an extra day. I'd like to see an extra day too, because I'd like to see people go to breakouts and actually go through the process of identifying the problems and then developing strategies to address those problems. In community policing, if you're doing real community policing, there's a component connected to it called problem solving. Mm-hmm. In the traditional white model, it's called SARA, S-A-R-A. That means scanning, analysis, response, and assessment. Dr. Bell's, what's associated with Dr. Bell's, and the one that we worked on is the 7 steps of problem solving, which is allows you to write it out, the 7 steps. Identify the problem, analyze the problem, design a strategy, gain agreement, implement the strategy, and then most of all, evaluate the strategy. Because the object of it at the end of the day is to solve the problem. So you can't do anything wrong because you can go to the 7th step. So I'd like to suggest, because what I've heard for the last couple of years and what I hear all the time are people clearly articulating what the issues are, what the concerns are. You all are stakeholders in this process. Each and every one of you bring something different to the table. There's no duplication in the entire room. Everybody brings something different. Everything is valuable. And handled right, and we will have the solutions to our problems. The reason why we're subject to police brutality is because we bring the police in on situations sometimes that we can take care of ourselves.
Yes, right. Yes.
And we don't need the police.
Right.
See? We're working on a situation right now in Washington, D.C. Washington, at one time, had set a record for having over 500 homicides in 1 year. Now, that was back during the time when I first joined the police department. Do you know that last year Washington had only 88 homicides? 88 homicides. And in that period of time, from the 80s to now, what caused those homicides to go down are a number of things. And the police were one of the least things that do it.
That's right.
That caused it. But I can tell you that they claim they've done community policing over that period of time, and they've had partnerships with community. And that community is involved in reducing crime. Because the police 85% of our police officers don't live in the city. And they're always talking about programs. You know, if you see something happen, call the police. Now, at the end of the year when they celebrated that we only had 88 homicides and they had the press conference, who do you think was at the press conference?
The police.
That's exactly right. The police was at the press conference, and there wasn't one citizen group, there wasn't one anti-crime group, there wasn't one citizen advisory person, there wasn't a single citizen in the group other than the mayor. Now, how can you reduce crime, claim you're working in partnership with citizens, and then when you stand up to take a bow, there's no citizens in the room? So you can't expect, from the police perspective, you can't expect now the citizens to all of a sudden wake up and want to continue to work with you when you haven't spread the wealth around. So we have a group now, we're working on confronting them about this. Because see, you can't keep using me every day.
That's right.
And then when the time to hand out the goodies or the perks, I'm not involved in that process.
That's right.
See, so it's really important. So what I wanted to suggest, Dr. Morgan, is that we have maybe an extra day, but certainly there ought to be breakouts. And we ought to be able to have our folk go through a process of identifying what the issues are and then working toward solving those problems. I just see that as being so valuable in terms of getting things done and developing and creating that sense of community again. Because we can solve these problems. I don't agree with folks who say we have a gang problem, because I don't think we have gangs. You know, the first original gang was the Black Panthers. They wasn't a gang.
Thank you.
Anybody who know the history of the Black Panthers, they wasn't a gang. They was created to address the deficit that existed in their community, and they did a hell of a job of it. And the reason why we have gangs in our community now, or so-called gangs in our community, or crews, or whatever you think they are, the fact of the matter is that we aren't meeting the needs of our people.
That's right.
And our youngsters. And if we meet their needs, then they will be where they need to be. But they will be there if you don't. If you don't find something constructive for them to do, they will find something destructive. So it just makes sense. So I want to suggest that we have this session. This is fantastic. But we also have breakouts where we bring people together, have them talk about or involved in the identification of what the issues are. I heard the young man talk about what had happened. That's one of them right there. Developing how we're going to address formerly incarcerated citizens returning to our community. In Washington, D.C., I've been working with, a long time ago, ex-offender groups, but now formerly incarcerated groups is a part of what I do every single day. Because these guys have a valuable contribution to make. You know, we see white-collar, formerly incarcerated people on television giving advice.
Every day.
Every single day. And some of them are still thieves.
That's right.
But we don't see the brothers and sisters who were wrongly incarcerated. Some spent time on death row. We don't see them sitting on television talking about utilizing their valuable expertise in this environment where we have crime and violence. And they have something to contribute. They are stakeholders in this process. If we wanted to address a particular ill in our community, we need to be about bringing together there's assets and then assigning them in the kind of way to address what the problems are. And we can do that. We need to get the police out of our life. Sometimes we need to get the politicians out of our life.
No, that's
First
right.
of all, we need to put them on notice.
That's right.
That's right.
Like the brother said earlier. So we want to put you on notice that you're not doing what you're supposed to do.
Mm-hmm.
And let me give you a real-time example. In Washington, D.C., we have over 50,000 formerly incarcerated people. They're one of the most influential political groups in this city. The group, and we even have a young man who heads up this division in our government called the Office of Returning Citizens. So one of the council members, that community had come up with a piece of legislation to address some of the human rights violations that have occurred to them over the last 10 years, all right? So what happened was that the legislation was going through the council. This one councilman, upon the initial conversation, supported the legislation. When the legislation came before the council, he decided to switch. After the legislation went down, they got back together. The formerly incarcerated group went to the council to see Councilman Brown and told him that they was going to take care of him. He lost the race. He lost the election that he was just about to go into. And then he decided that he was going to run again because we had a vacancy on the council that's going on now, that's going to be filled on the 23rd. He figured that he could get in that race and get his seat back. They had a candidate for him and told him again that they were going to make sure that he wasn't going to get elected. Now this is one of the most powerful group of people in our community. Because in our city, unlike a lot of cities, people who are guilty of felons serve time when they come back. As soon as they come back, what can they do?
Vote.
They can vote. They can vote. One of the very few places in the country. And not only do they vote when they come back, but if you're serving time as a misdemeanor,
You can vote.
you can even vote while you're in the jail.
That's right.
And we have organizations that take the voting polls to the jail so that people can vote. That's the community that we need to create and utilize and benefit from in our community as well. So that's what I'm talking about. Because these are problems that we can solve. And you don't have to be up. We don't all have to be in the same place. We can meet each other where they are and get this done.
That's right.
Because all of us aren't in the same place. But it's important that we create and develop that sense of community so we can get this done. Because I'm tired.
That's right. That's
I'm
right.
tired.
That's right.
I have this rule, and we were in the meeting the other day, because on June the 17th, we just had a press conference on April the 4th, the 45th anniversary of the death of Dr. King. And we were talking about the war on drugs is a war on us, the war on black people. That's what the war on drugs was, a war on black people, right? Because white people, we know from research and studies that white people use drugs more than black people.
That's right.
But black people get arrested more than white people.
That's right.
All right? So we had the press conference, but as a result of that, on June the 17th, we're having a big rally in the city to talk about and tell President Obama that we want you to take some of that money that now we're not using to fight people overseas, to fight and help us in our community and to rebuild our community. Because one of the things that the drug war did was to strip the very basic foundation of our community. See, when you don't have people in your community, you don't have resources. And they took all our black men out of the community because they're in jail.
That's right.
And we know that everybody who went to jail didn't have to go to jail.
That's right. That's true. That's right.
Mm-hmm.
But the war was discriminating. The war on drugs discriminated against black because they were the most vulnerable. Because see, you can't, white people sell crack, powder, cocaine all day long. Do it in the suites and penthouses on K Street.
That's right.
In the powerful. But the black young men that were selling the crack and the $5 nickel bags of marijuana was standing on the corner in the open aisle of the law enforcement. So when they said, where did you think they was gonna go? They wasn't going down on K Street to the penthouse to try to arrest the cocaine dealer when they could go to the corner of 14th and U Street and pick them off every single day. And for every one they took off the corner, there was 10 waiting to replace them.
That's right.
That's right.
Yeah.
And they thought they was making money.
That's right.
They thought they was making money, but no, them young black boys wasn't making no money. Now they was maybe making enough money to buy a pair of Jordans, but that's not no money. But that's the kind of war that was perpetrated on us in that regard. I worked in that city. I worked on those corners. And they was picking the young men off. It was unbelievable. But the fact of the matter is that the development that came through our city had more to do with the elimination of crime in our community than all the police in the world. When they built the new municipal center at the corner of 14th and U, the people who were involved in selling drugs, they moved somewhere else. Because there was no market there for the drugs, for the marijuana. Just wasn't gonna happen. Because people that was going to work every day, even if they smoked marijuana, they wasn't gonna buy it on the way into the municipal center.
That's right. That's right.
They had better sense than that. And that's what they was doing. So we just need to bring our people together and talk about it, develop strategies, and get it done. We do it every day in the city. And it's not the easiest thing to do, but it creates and builds a sense of community. And it causes it gets done. And we need to do that. Also wanted to, I think we said that if we had some questions, we would have some time for some questions and whatnot. I wanna end with this, because I use that same model for my life and the things that I do. So at this point, I wanna say we have to take on an honest assessment of to what extent do we honest evaluation of the role that we play in the mass incarceration that has taken place in our country. What role did we play?
Okay.
See,
Perpetrate.
we played a role in it.
That's right.
Because see, we thought, well, let me give you an example. The description of what a successful police officer was when I went there was based on how many people you lock up, how many tickets you write, you know, how many felonies, how many misdemeanors, how many hours you spend in court, all those kind of things. And I worked in the city, Washington, D.C. If you looked at, as a matter of fact, it's documented. There have never ever been in the history of the juvenile justice system in Washington, D.C. a white kid incarcerated.
What?
And blacks at the heyday never made any more than 72% of the city. But I can tell you why they didn't get arrested, because when they committed crimes, it was classified as mischievous behavior. And that's not an arrestable offense. But black kids was getting locked up and the key was thrown away, and it was black police officers who were participating in that process.
That's right.
So to what extent did they contribute to the problem?
That's right.
See? And that over 80% of the people who was in the local jail or the prison that we had at one time, over 83% of them were African American people. And the whites that ended up being there were those who were involved in crimes such as traffic offenses. But we know that whites were committing crime in our city. So we've always sort of had this thing going on. But we were being judged on how many arrests we made, how many tickets we wrote. And so the guys would go out there and arrest people because they thought that that was being a successful police officer. So equally, we had to play a role in this dismantling this system.
That's right.
And so if you were like that, that's fine, but now you can't be like that. Everyone has to step up to the plate. And we really have to do the kind of job that's going to really make a difference. So again, I want to suggest that we have that extra day, or in that day, a breakout or something that we can talk about solving problems.
We have all voted and we agreed to take you onto the task force and help us plan for next year.